Every legal encounter leaves a trace. Every strict investigation pursues honesty. Comprehending your legal rights, establishing true justice.
Where'd you get that dog? Looks like one of ours. You steal him off a cruiser?
Sir, my name's Officer Nakia Jones, K-9 handler, 8 years with this department. This is Sultan, my partner.
Yeah, that's cute. Step away from the animal.
I'm on duty. Here's my ID and badge.
On the evening of June 15th, 2020, Warrensville Heights police officer Matthew Janicki, badge number 437, spotted a black man walking a German Shepherd near East 174th Street and immediately radioed dispatch claiming possible theft of police property. He approached with his hand on his service weapon, demanding identification and insisting the dog was stolen from a K-9 unit, ignoring every attempt at explanation. Within minutes, Janicki had the man's hands behind his back, threatening felony charges for possession of what he called clearly illegal property. What Officer Janicki didn't know was that he'd just handcuffed his own colleague, Officer Nakia Jones, an 8-year veteran K-9 handler, and that his $25.1 million mistake was being recorded from 3 different angles. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The temperature had finally dropped to something comfortable that Tuesday evening when Nakia Jones decided to take Sultan out for their routine walk. At 34 years old, Jones had spent 8 years with the Warrensville Heights Police Department, the last 5 as one of their most decorated K-9 handlers. He'd trained Sultan from a pup, molding the German Shepherd into one of the sharpest narcotics detection dogs in Cuyahoga County. Together, they'd made over 200 successful busts, cleared dozens of crime scenes, and earned 3 commendations from the mayor's office. Off-duty, Jones preferred comfortable clothes, usually a hoodie and jeans, nothing that screamed cop. Sultan didn't need a uniform to know who was in charge. The dog moved with precision, heeling perfectly at Jones's left side as they walked the familiar route through the neighborhood where Jones had lived for the past 6 years. They were 2 blocks from home when the patrol car's headlights lit them up from behind. Jones glanced back, mildly curious but not concerned. He recognized the vehicle markings, the same Crown Victoria model he'd ridden in countless times. Sultan's ears perked up at the sound of the engine slowing, but the dog remained calm, trained to stay focused on his handler. Jones kept walking, assuming the officer was just passing through or maybe heading to a call. Then the car pulled up alongside them, and through the passenger window, Jones saw Officer Matthew Janicki staring at Sultan with an expression that made Jones's stomach tighten. Janicki was relatively new to the evening shift, a transplant from day patrol, who'd been with the department for 6 years but rarely crossed paths with the K-9 unit. He had a reputation for being thorough, maybe too thorough, the kind of officer who wrote tickets for expired tags even when the driver was heading to the DMV. He'd grown up in Parma, a predominantly white suburb 20 minutes west, and transferred to Warrensville Heights after his brother-in-law recommended the department. His record was clean, no excessive force complaints, no disciplinary actions, just a steady pattern of by-the-book police work that occasionally tipped into overzealous territory. When he saw the black man in the hoodie walking the German Shepherd, something clicked in his mind that had nothing to do with facts and everything to do with assumptions. The patrol car door swung open, and Janicki stepped out, his right hand resting on his holster. In that casual but ready position officers learn in the academy. "Hey, hold up," he called out, his voice carrying the edge of someone who expected immediate compliance. Jones stopped and turned, Sultan automatically sitting at his side. "Evening, officer," Jones said calmly, already sensing where this might be heading but hoping he was wrong. Janicki approached slowly, his eyes locked on Sultan, studying the dog's build, the professional way it sat, the slight scarring on its front legs from a training exercise 2 years prior. "That's a nice dog," Janicki said, but there was no compliment in his tone. "Where'd you get him?" Jones felt the question land like a slap. "This is Sultan," My K9 partner, he said evenly, keeping his voice professional despite the heat rising in his chest. I'm Officer Nakia Jones, K9 unit. Janicki's expression didn't change. If anything, his suspicion seemed to deepen. You got ID? He asked, his hand still near his weapon. Jones reached slowly for his back pocket, the movement deliberate and visible, pulling out his wallet. Inside was his police identification, his badge, his credentials, everything that proved exactly who he was. He held it out toward Janicki, but the officer barely glanced at it. That dog looks like police property, Janicki said flatly. You telling me you just happen to have a trained German Shepherd that looks exactly like a K9 unit dog? The absurdity of the question hung in the air between them. Jones took a breath, forcing himself to stay calm. I'm telling you, I am police property, he said, trying to inject some lightness into the moment. We work out of the same department. I can give you my sergeant's number right now. But Janicki was already shaking his head, already reaching for his radio. Step away from the dog, he ordered, his voice harder now. Sultan's ears flattened slightly, picking up on the tension radiating from his handler. Jones didn't move. Officer, I'm showing you my credentials. I'm telling you who I am. Just call K9 headquarters. They'll confirm everything. Janicki's hand moved to his radio and he pressed the button. Dispatch, this is 437. I've got a possible 1065 at East 174th and Puritas. Need backup for suspect with stolen police K9. Jones felt his entire body go cold. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I'm not a suspect, he said firmly, his voice rising for the first time. I'm a police officer, and you need to verify that before you do something you're going to regret. But Janicki wasn't listening anymore. He was moving into position, hand back on his weapon, treating Jones like any other threat he'd been trained to neutralize. The backup units arrived in less than 3 minutes. 2 patrol cars pulling up with the lights flashing but no sirens. The kind of response reserved for situations officers considered serious, but not yet dangerous. Jones watched them approach and felt a sinking sensation in his gut that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with humiliation. He was standing on a public street, 2 blocks from his own home, while 3 white officers treated him like a criminal because Matthew Janicki couldn't be bothered to make a single phone call. Sultan remained seated at his side, perfectly still, but Jones could feel the tension in the dog's muscles. The animal was trained to protect him, and every instinct Sultan had was probably screaming that something was wrong. Officer David Chen stepped out of the first backup vehicle, a 12-year veteran who'd worked with Jones on a drug task force 3 years earlier. Jones felt a wave of relief. Chen, tell this guy who I am, he called out, his voice carrying across the street. But Chen's expression was unreadable as he approached, and he didn't acknowledge Jones's words. Instead, he walked directly to Janicki, who was already talking, his hands gesturing toward Jones and Sultan. Jones couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw Chen glance his way, saw the uncertainty in his former colleague's eyes, and realized, with growing horror, that Chen was actually considering Janicki's version of events. The third officer, a young woman Jones didn't recognize, positioned herself at an angle that gave her a clear line of sight to both Jones and the dog. Janicki walked back over with Chen beside him, and his posture had shifted from suspicious to openly hostile. My partner here says he's never seen you before, Janicki said, jabbing a finger toward Chen. So I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back right now. Jones stared at Chen in disbelief. You're joking, he said, but Chen wouldn't meet his eyes. Dave, we worked the Martinez case together. You've seen me with Sultan a dozen times. Chen shifted his weight uncomfortably. That was a while ago, man. I work nights now. I don't really see the K9 guys. It was a coward's answer, and they both knew it. Chen remembered him perfectly well, but he wasn't going to contradict another officer in the field, wasn't going to break that unspoken rule about backing your partner even when your partner was dead wrong. Jones felt the rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. The kind of anger that could get a black man killed if he let it show. He forced his voice to stay level, forced his hands to remain visible and non-threatening. "I need you to call Sergeant Williams at K9 headquarters," he said slowly, enunciating each word. "His direct number is in the department directory. He will confirm my identity in 30 seconds. Janicki pulled out his handcuffs instead, the metal catching the streetlight as he moved closer. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back, or I will use force," he said. And there was something almost eager in his voice, like he wanted Jones to resist, wanted an excuse to escalate this further. By now, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk across the street. Jones could see phones raised, cameras recording, and he felt a twisted sense of gratitude that at least this humiliation would be documented. An elderly black woman he recognized from church stood on her porch with her hand over her mouth. Two teenage boys sat on their bikes, watching with wide eyes. A white couple walking their dog had stopped to stare, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Jones knew how this looked. He knew what story these videos would tell if he ended up shot on this sidewalk. Just another black man who didn't comply. Another hashtag. Another body. He turned around slowly and placed his hands behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut, tight enough to bite into his wrists. Sultan stood up immediately, a low whine escaping from his throat, and the young female officer drew her weapon. "Control your dog," she shouted, her voice cracking with nervousness. Jones felt ice run through his veins. "He's not my dog to control right now. He's a trained police K9 reacting to his handler being detained," he said urgently. "He's not going to attack anyone, but you need to holster your weapon before he perceives you as a threat." The woman didn't lower her gun. Sultan's whining grew louder, his body language shifting from confused to distressed. Janicki grabbed Jones by the arm and started walking him toward the patrol car. But Sultan moved to follow, staying close to Jones like he'd been trained to do. "Somebody secure that animal," Janicki barked, and Chen moved forward with a catch pole, the kind animal control uses for aggressive strays. Jones stopped walking, forcing Janicki to stop with him. "If you come at him with that pole, he will defend himself," Jones said, his voice tight. "He's a $70,000 police dog with bite training. You put that thing near him, and this situation becomes a nightmare for everyone." Chen hesitated, the pole lowering slightly. For a moment, Jones thought reason might prevail. Then Janicki shoved Jones forward, hard enough to make him stumble. "I don't care if that dog cost $1 million. You don't get to tell us how to do our job, pal," he said. Jones caught his balance, his shoulders screaming from the awkward position of his handcuffed arms. "My wallet is in my back right pocket," he said, abandoning any pretense of pride now. "My police ID is inside. My badge number is 8427. I have been with this department for 8 years. Everything I'm telling you can be verified in less time than this conversation is taking." Janicki reached into Jones's pocket and pulled out the wallet, flipping it open. Jones watched his face, waiting for the recognition to dawn, waiting for the apology that would surely come. Instead, Janicki held up the police ID and squinted at it under the streetlight. "This could be fake," he said dismissively. "You can buy these online." Chen had moved closer to Sultan now, the catch pole still in his hands, and the dog was watching him with laser focus, his training warring with his instinct to protect Jones. The crowd across the street had grown larger, more phones out, more witnesses to this spectacular display of incompetence and racial profiling playing out in real time. Jones could hear someone shouting, "That's messed up," and another voice yelling, "Let him go!" But the officers ignored them all. Janicki walked Jones to the patrol car and pushed his head down, guiding him into the back seat the way you'd handle any arrestee. The door slammed shut, and Jones found himself caged behind the partition, his hands still cuffed behind him, watching through the window as 3 police officers stood around his dog, trying to figure out what to do next. Sultan was barking now, sharp, urgent sounds that Jones recognized as distress calls. The dog didn't understand why his handler had been taken away. He didn't understand why these people in uniforms, people who should have been allies, were treating Jones like an enemy. Through the car window, Jones saw Janicki on his radio again, probably calling animal control or trying to reach a K9 supervisor, now that he actually had a logistical problem on his hands. Chen was keeping his distance from Sultan, apparently having second thoughts about the catch-pole approach. The young female officer had finally holstered her weapon, but looked deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation. And Jones sat in the back of that patrol car, a decorated police officer being treated like a criminal, and wondered how much worse this night could possibly get before someone with authority and common sense finally showed up to end it. Jones had been sitting in the back of that patrol car for 17 minutes when the K9 unit supervisor's truck pulled up to the scene, and those 17 minutes had felt like 17 hours. Through the window, he'd watched Janicki try and fail to secure Sultan, watched the crowd across the street grow to nearly 40 people, watched Chen make several uncomfortable phone calls that suggested someone higher up the chain was finally asking questions Janicki didn't want to answer. Sultan had stopped barking but was pacing now, circling the area where Jones had been standing, his training keeping him from running off, but his loyalty making it impossible for him to settle. When Sergeant Robert Williams stepped out of his truck, still in uniform from his day shift, Jones felt the first real breath of relief he'd had since this nightmare started. Williams was a 23-year veteran, a broad-shouldered white man from Kentucky, who'd built the K9 program from nothing and treated his handlers like family. He'd personally recruited Jones 8 years ago, had seen something in the young officer that others missed, and had mentored him through every step of his K9 certification. Williams took one look at the scene, at Sultan pacing anxiously, at Jones sitting handcuffed in the patrol car, at the 3 officers standing around looking like they'd just realized they'd made a catastrophic mistake, and his face went from confusion to fury in about 2 seconds flat. He walked straight past Janicki without a word, pulled open the back door of the patrol car, and leaned in. "Nakia, what in the hell is going on here?" he asked, and his voice was shaking with barely controlled rage. Jones gave him the short version, keeping his voice flat and factual, the way he'd been trained to do in incident reports. Williams listened without interrupting, his jaw clenching tighter with every sentence. When Jones finished, Williams straightened up and slammed the car door so hard the whole vehicle shook. He turned to face Janicki, and every officer on that street suddenly found somewhere else to look. "Badge number," Williams demanded, his voice cutting through the evening air like a knife. Janicki pulled himself up straighter, trying to maintain some authority. 437, sir, but I don't report to you." Williams took a step closer, close enough that Janicki had to tilt his head back slightly to maintain eye contact. "You want to bet your career on that answer, son?" Chen had gone pale, backing away from the confrontation like he wanted to disappear into the pavement. The young female officer was staring at her boots, her hands clasped behind her back. Williams pointed at Jones in the patrol car. "That man is Officer Nakia Jones, K9 handler, badge 8427. That dog is Sultan, a certified narcotics detection K9, assigned to Officer Jones for the past 5 years. They have made over 200 arrests together and recovered more drugs than your entire shift has found in the last 6 months combined." Janicki's face had started to lose color, but he wasn't backing down. He didn't identify himself properly, he said, and Jones could hear the defensiveness creeping into his voice. He looked suspicious, walking a police dog in civilian clothes. Williams turned to Chen. Did Officer Jones present his police identification? Chen nodded reluctantly. He showed us a police ID. Yes, sir. Williams turned back to Janicki. And you didn't verify it how exactly? The question hung in the air, and Janicki had no good answer. It could have been fake, he finally said, but even he seemed to realize how weak that sounded. Williams pulled out his phone and made a call, putting it on speaker. The phone rang twice before a woman's voice answered. Warrensville Heights Police Department, Records Division. Williams didn't waste time with pleasantries. This is Sergeant Williams, K-9 Unit. I need you to confirm badge number 8427. Last name Jones, first name Nakia. There was the sound of typing. Then the woman came back on the line. Officer Nakia Jones, badge 8427, hired March 2012. Currently assigned to K-9 Unit under Sergeant Robert Williams. No disciplinary actions on file. 3 commendations for outstanding service. Williams ended the call and looked at Janicki with an expression that could have melted steel. Get him out of those handcuffs right now, or I'm calling the chief myself, and you can explain this to him. Janicki fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking slightly as he opened the patrol car door and reached in to unlock Jones's handcuffs. The metal clicked open, and Jones pulled his arms forward, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had dug in. He stepped out of the car slowly, his legs stiff from sitting in that cramped position. Sultan saw him and came running, jumping up to put his paws on Jones's chest, licking his face, whining with relief. Jones wrapped his arms around the dog, burying his face in Sultan's fur for just a moment, letting the animal's presence ground him. When he looked up, Williams was standing there with a hand extended. Jones shook it, and Williams leaned in close. You okay? He asked quietly. Jones nodded, not trusting himself to speak yet. Williams turned back to the other officers, and his voice shifted from concerned friend to commanding superior in an instant. I want all 3 of your incident reports on my desk by end of shift, and I'm forwarding this entire situation to Internal Affairs first thing tomorrow morning. Chen finally found his voice. Sergeant, I was just backing up my partner. I didn't know. Williams cut him off with a raised hand. You worked a task force with Officer Jones 3 years ago. You knew exactly who he was, and you stood there and let this happen anyway. Chen's face flushed red, and he opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. There was nothing he could say that would make this better. The young female officer looked like she might cry. Janicki had taken several steps back, his earlier confidence completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that he'd just destroyed his own career in spectacular fashion. The crowd across the street had started cheering when Jones was released from the handcuffs, and several people were still recording. Jones could see the elderly woman from church making her way across the street, probably coming to check on him. One of the teenage boys on the bike shouted, "That's messed up, man," loud enough for everyone to hear. A middle-aged black man in a business suit was on his phone, and Jones heard him say lawsuit and civil rights violation before Williams moved to block his view. "Let's get you out of here," Williams said to Jones, guiding him toward the K-9 unit truck. Sultan followed, staying close to Jones's left side, like always. Before they could leave, Janicki called out, "Officer Jones, I was just doing my job. If you'd been more cooperative." Jones turned around, and the look on his face made Janicki stop mid-sentence. "I showed you my identification," Jones said, his voice deadly quiet. "I told you my name, my badge number, my sergeant's phone number. I stayed calm while you handcuffed me and threatened my dog in front of 40 witnesses. I did everything right, And you still treated me like a criminal. He just took a step toward Janicki, and Williams put a hand on his shoulder, but Jones shook it off. You know what the worst part is? If I wasn't a cop, if I was just a regular black man walking his dog, you would have done the same thing. And there would be no Sergeant Williams to call, no badge to verify, no consequences for you at all. Janicki had no response to that. He stood there looking small and exposed under the streetlights, while Jones climbed into Williams's truck, Sultan jumping in beside him. As they pulled away from the scene, Jones looked back and saw Janicki talking urgently with Chen, both of them probably trying to figure out how to write their reports in a way that didn't make them look as bad as they actually were. The crowd was dispersing now, but phones were still out, and Jones knew those videos would be online within the hour. His humiliation, his anger, his powerlessness in that moment would be preserved forever, shared and commented on and dissected by strangers who would never know what it felt like to be cuffed on your own street for the crime of existing while black. Williams drove in silence for a few blocks, then pulled over in an empty parking lot. He turned to Jones, and his expression was a mix of anger and guilt. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner. I'm sorry you had to go through that." Jones nodded, staring straight ahead through the windshield. "I've been doing this job for 8 years," he said quietly. "I've risked my life for this department. I've bled for this city." And none of that mattered to Janicki because all he saw was my skin color. Williams didn't try to argue or defend his colleagues. He just sat there, letting Jones process what had happened, letting the weight of that truth settle between them. Jones didn't sleep that night. He sat in his living room with Sultan at his feet, watching the videos spread across social media like wildfire. By morning, local news stations were calling. By noon, civil rights attorneys from 3 different firms had reached out, offering representation. Jones hired Benjamin Crump's associate, a sharp woman named Patricia Moore, who specialized in police misconduct cases. She took one look at the body camera footage, the witness videos, and Jones's spotless record, and told him this was the clearest case of racial profiling she'd seen in 15 years of practice. The lawsuit was filed 6 weeks later, naming Officer Matthew Janicki, the Warrensville Heights Police Department, and the city itself. Jones wasn't asking for an apology anymore. He was demanding accountability, $25 million in damages for civil rights violations, emotional distress, and the complete destruction of his reputation within the department. Internal Affairs cleared Janicki of criminal wrongdoing, but recommended termination for failure to follow basic verification procedures. Janicki resigned before he could be fired, releasing a statement saying he'd been following his training and protecting the community. Chen received a written reprimand and requested a transfer. The young female officer left law enforcement entirely 3 months later. The trial lasted 8 days. Jones testified for 6 hours, describing in excruciating detail what it felt like to be handcuffed by his own colleagues while his dog cried for him. The jury of 7 women and 5 men deliberated for less than 4 hours. They awarded Jones $25.1 million, one of the largest civil rights settlements in Ohio history. The verdict sent shockwaves through police departments across the state, forcing conversations about implicit bias, proper identification procedures, and the toxic culture of officers protecting other officers even when they're clearly wrong. Jones never went back to patrol. He took the settlement, retired from the force at 35, and started a nonprofit training program teaching de-escalation techniques and racial bias awareness to law enforcement agencies nationwide. Sultan retired with him, living out his remaining years as a beloved pet rather than a working dog. When asked in interviews if he regretted filing the lawsuit, Jones always gave the same answer: I didn't do this for the money. I did it so the next black man walking his dog doesn't end up dead because an officer couldn't see past his own prejudice.
Truth is a continuous pursuit, and awareness is your best defense. Thank you for watching and championing global transparency.